So we've gone through patching. We've gotten past day 30. We're now on to what I call day 180. So we're halfway through the year, and something bad has happened. Everything is on fire. Has anyone ever worked in help desk, answered phones? It's not working. Why is it working?
I remember.
In fact, my mother was calling me for tech support.
I remember where I came
started. From. Hi, Mom. Hopefully she's watching. But, I told Nigel we weren't allowed to fill this entire presentation with memes, but and I'm sure VMware Legal would like me to say that we do not endorse this television show. But however, you should watch IT Crowd. It's a great watch on the way home. But there's a lot of problems with the existing historic support experience that everyone's had to deal with in this industry. And this status quo consists of, it's always been very much a reactive stance. You hit an issue, and let's go through this flow chart and this Gantt chart of what this looks like. You pick up the phone, you see a couple symptoms, and you describe them to the person on the other end. Now, it could be something where they say, congratulations, you're customer number 500,000 who's had the same issue. Here's your KB. That's a short call, but it's still kind of depressing that everyone keeps hitting the same issue. The previous health checks that we discussed, the online health checks and the faster ways to remediate environments, those help solve that. That said, there's always going to be patient zero for a new issue. There's always going to be that person. And so this is where you get deeper into that support experience. And they always ask for the same thing, logs. There's another Austin tech support company here who actually has a giant physical log in the middle of their help desk. The Spiceworks guys, and they like point at it. They're like, check the logs. But and you'll get asked for logs, and you'll get asked for more logs. And then they'll say, you got any more logs after that? And the reason for this is they're trying to piece together a picture of not only what Humpty Dumpty looks like after it fell off the wall, but what it looked like before. We're trying to paint this whole story and this whole picture here and go through this health and this thing. So the other part of why we hate logs in this whole process is, you go through, and it always feels like a very slow process, because you got to sit there and you've got to export the logs. You got to find a place to put the logs. You then have to upload the logs. In this upload process, it always feels like you're trying to upload a petabyte of data on what you assume must be a 56K modem, attached to a fax machine or something. You've got some, it never, if you're trying to do a large log bundle and you try to do it over a web upload, it always fails and someone asks you to pull out an FTP client or something barbaric. This process is bad. There's some other challenges with logs. You could have lost logs in this support experience because maybe you did an embedded install and you didn't create a log partition. Now you do get a nice alarm that does that now, but if you install to an embedded USB device or an SD card or something like that, you can't write logs to it. You'd burn out the write endurance. So the logs have to get redirected somewhere. If someone forgot that, you now have no logs. You also could have log rollover or age out. So maybe you're generating so many logs, you've got something very noisy in an environment that the retention is forcing it to only keep maybe a couple hours when really you need a couple of days to diagnose this. Other problems that can happen in the traditional support experience, and having been on both sides of the phone support over the years, is someone who's in an outage. Maybe you've been working 14 hours, and this happened at 4 a.m. in the middle of that exchange migration from hell. Maybe something else is going on. Human memory gets really foggy the longer you've been awake. And the longer you've been without sleep, the worse you remember things. And then eventually, once you get the blame games going internally, then people start denying that anything changed or anything happened, and it gets really fun. There's also other context that may need to be included. If you've got storage, you've got networking, you've got storage fabrics, there's a lot of different pieces. And some of this with HCI, us being both the storage vendor and the hypervisor vendor and using plain old Ethernet, this does simplify down all the places and we have to take a lot more ownership, for good or for worse. When we go through this though, we need to be able to provide context. We need to understand, that great question of how did this ever work? Which is sometimes a legitimate question. So I've got an environment that I'm going to show real quick and show a little bit behind the scenes of what this actually looks like, assuming. So in support, if you actually have if you've got the enhanced support options, you have those dedicated teams. You can actually call them ahead of time and they could stage a dashboard of your environments. The other thing also is that if you call them and you give them the support ID, which is actually within the UI, if you go to the monitor tab, you go down to vSAN, the bottom support, there's a support tag. They can then look at the phone home data and drop in. And in this case, they can actually see this cluster. Now, some things asking earlier about what's phoned home. If you notice here how it just says host 97, host 111, those are not the real names or the host names in the environment. No DNS names, no IP addresses, no MAC addresses, nothing identifiable as part of that phone home process. This is actually obfuscated, which is a word that normally I can't pronounce correctly.
That I'm like, bravo.
So, and actually, how many of you actually have looked at what's in the logs you send home to support? You probably are already actually sending all the things you don't want in the phone home. So this is actually making that job of making security and compliance happy with you a lot easier, basically, out of the box.
Think about admins too, right? They're not calling the security guy and say, hey, security guy, I'm sending all this stuff. They're sending the stuff as soon as they download the log. They're probably not following compliance all the time. So, I doubt folks are going through the logs and scrubbing all that information out. So it's just one of those, I guess, necessary evils of sending it. But having this tool and having the data collected this way anonymously kind of mitigates that risk there. So
I actually asked support, I'm like, so what's the craziest thing you've seen a customer do to get data to you? They said, well, they printed the logs, they took a black magic marker, and then they faxed that.
Sounds secure to me.
I was like, how long did it take them to get the logs to you? They're like 3 days. I'm like, oh, that's a fun outage. Hopefully I don't bank with them.
So to answer your question before, I think this may help too, John, if you're even clicking on some of these tabs like networking or config, like under networking, you're not going to see any of the information that's brought up.
There's no IP addresses. That's all abstracted in regards to that. And if we go look through, there are some things you can see. Like, for instance, I can see what type of drives are in here, which may be relevant to a known health issue. I can see the capacity amounts. I can see performance, health, and configuration. I can also see all the health checks in the environment. So basically, in this case, support can look over your shoulder and look at that health check that's failing and see what's going on with that in regards to that. So if there is an issue to where you have a cluster partition or there's some type of specific issue or there's maybe a network latency issue, they can look at that and see which hosts are alarming, what the metrics are. Also can direct to KBs and discuss these issues. It's also worth noting that those health checks I mentioned, just to try to control false alarms, we actually push them internally here first, have our support people validate, look at environments that clash with that before we push it out. We're trying not to chicken little everyone and terrify them of of what's going on. We also have the history of the environment. So if things are changing in the environment, we can see that. And then also in the top left here, they can actually go back in time. And we retain about 2 weeks right now on this. But they can actually jump back to specific times within that environment and so forth. So the other thing also with this is under their performance capabilities, if you've got a new cluster and you're benchmarking or you're burning it in, there's actually a performance diagnostics feature within the VMware UI for vSAN. And so if you're running storage benchmarks, those benchmark runs will also show up in here. So support and you can basically look at the same data sets and see what's going on with that. There's also the ability for them, and hopefully this will look a little prettier. There we go. It's in goth mode. We got the nice black background.
Yeah.
They're actually able to look at performance metrics to that environment, drop that down. You may recognize this. Yes, this is Grafana. But they're also able to not just look at storage metrics, but also networking metrics. So we can look at individual TCP errors, TCP retransmit, see what's going on. Storage obviously deteriorates performance exponentially with networking performance. And they're able to look at those metrics and work with you. Now by default, the performance sampling here, so we don't go crazy and use gigabytes instead of megabytes on the phone at home. This is a 5-minute polling telemetry. Now we recognize for networking issues, if you're diagnosing an intermittent issue, such as some type of buffer exhaustion or something like that, that's not granular enough. There actually is within the UI, we have the option to what's called network diagnostic mode, and that's going to do 1 second granularity. Now instead of phone home every hour, those digest, because we have to store them in a RAM drive so we don't start creating more load on the performance database, those are actually flushed back every 10 minutes. So that's something you would, if you're working with support, chasing down a network goblin, that's something they could do. But this is something to where we're really trying to make the support an extension of your staff and their capabilities and their vision, as well as also time to value. All the stuff I'm looking at, I never had to ask the customer to upload a support bundle. We're able to jump in and start delivering value very quickly together. So the expectations on availability and response just keep getting better or worse depending on who you are every year. And so we've really had to kind of up our game and work on making sure we can support that.
So there was a button that said export to Word.
Yep.
How much data gets exported Is it just whatever screen you're on?
It's what's in, yeah. So actually, it can actually dump a manifest of what we have. Mind you, there's still nothing, that's identifiable in regards to that. What that gets used for is specifically if someone's asking for an RCA, which is a common request. They'll actually dump it to Word, do a markup, type notes. It actually helps speed up that RCA. And that was actually a feature that was driven specifically by some of the engineers working directly with the support agents. One mandate that comes down from Pat, our CEO, is that we need engineering to think about support and support to think about engineering. And just to kind of give you some under the hood idea, information about some things we've done is we've had some of our senior development architects, like Christian Dickman and some of these guys, actually, these brilliant people go sit down in Cork in the EMEA Support Center for a week and actually answer tickets and actually work through the process. And that in some ways drives product improvements, but also it drives tooling support for the support people in regards to this. So that is something, though, that we're always looking at better ways. One question that does come up a lot is, can customers directly access this? Today, no. This is currently, behind the firewall, locked down for that. But that is a very common request of, can MSPs or something like that. That is something we're definitely interested in regards to that.
Yeah, because so as an admin, I know lots of them live in ticketing tools and have to answer RCAs on their side. Yeah, so being able to pull any of that data and just throw it into their remedies or Jiras or whatever their ticketing systems are would be great.
Yeah, and for now, you can just ask the support guy, hey, can you pull the performance graph? I was actually helping with an RCA recently. This was a fun case. Someone was using NPARs. Anyone know what NPARs are? Like an LPAR, but for networking. So you take a NIC and you chop it into a bunch of smaller interfaces at a hardware level. Then they were also doing traffic shaping on the vSphere side, which led to very interesting performance. When you take a 10 gig NIC, top it into 10 1 gig NICs, or I think maybe 20 half gig NICs or something insane, and then further shape that down. So the performance was fairly atrocious, and then we went through and, in fact, we're creating a KB and I think a health alarm for this. We just assume no one would ever try turning on NPARs. It's kind of an obscure feature of a NIC, but, you don't have to document, you can't pour beer on a server. So, but being able to use this information actually helped with the RCA and say, here's what it was before, here's what it was after, and go through that process, if that makes any sense.
Ron, how long are the logs kept for, the phone home logs kept up at GSS? Can you go back 6 months when you go, things were working fine here, and this is what's changed?
So right now, I think it's about 2 weeks. They have been looking at extending that. They have continually been adding a lot of storage to this environment. I'll have to get back to you on the specific day amount.
Okay.
Now, one thing to note within the UI, if I go back to the other screen, let's say you don't want to be, let me go click on one of these hosts to make it more apparent. So you obviously see the hosts here that are abstracted in regards to that. If I go look at, I think the NICs, here's an example of this. So you'll see the MAC address, so it says Elizabethtown, Ironside, and all these other fun words. You've got a 3-word code phrase there, and that's actually tied to an obfuscation map that the customer has in their environment they can go look at. So if I go tab over, I think I've got a vCenter active here. Actually, I don't have one. But that obfuscation map, so if the customer chooses to share that, so that way they quit having to talk in code about these things, which they can, this can be uploaded into this management environment. Now, in that case, that is only cached for a short time. I think that's about 7 days. And then we auto-purge that because that is identifiable information. So there is an auto-purge function on that. Right now, the performance data, it's more just a function of storage than anything else in regards to that. Although most people, if they've had a really bad issue, they're going to call within 2 weeks. So
You hope.
that's the dream.
So let me say something about it. We hope, right? So just recently, one of the health checks is for the Intel vulnerability, the L1F.
Oh yeah, it's a big one.
So that one, obviously big. It shows up in there that you haven't patched your systems. I saw some data last week, just over a 3-day span, say 17,000 systems were showing that were reporting this data back, that the health check was positive, that they had to apply that patch. And over that 3-day span, it's only 3 days now. Everyone's going to change in 3 days, but I've looked at longer data as well. The numbers of remediation are super, super low. So folks are not remediating the systems.
But that's a CPU micro
that
code.
it could,
and advanced setting.
those are maintenance windows that are longer. So yes, we hope that people will see the alert and do something about it as well. As I think we need to do a little bit of a better job, kind of showing the customer where new alerts are coming,
Are you
when
going
there's
to
new
share
health
this
checks and so
interface
forth. so.
somehow with the partners of the customer?
I get asked that a lot. So it's something we're in conversations with.
That's how you'll get your remediations done, because they're not going to. I mean, the partners are the ones who drive that. The customers may not even be managing their own environment.
Right, and that's very true. So yeah, and the data that I see is just anonymous. So I don't know if that's a customer, partner, vendor. Whose
Well,
data that is.
MSPs or your like IBM Cloud, for instance, who manage a lot of their customer environments.
Because I think even on the storage side, you guys provide that to your partners. I know those storage providers provide to their partners the ability to see the support stuff, all the time, everything that support sees. Well, most of the things that support sees.
Right.
They've dumbed some of it down so you can't see all of it. But obviously, I think your customers have a much better experience with that.
So one thing right now is there are ways to pull those existing. So if that partner has an RMM, real-time monitor managed tool, is the industry thing.
You have the post-process stuff. This is
One of the challenges that we're gonna have to work through on that, and this is something that we've been.
Entitlements, yeah. You have to work on entitlements for the partners.
Well, yeah. So it's figuring out mapping that. Also, the current legal framework we do this it's a really boring term. In fact, I'd like to come up with a new name for it, like Thunderbolt Mongoose or something cool. If anyone's willing to give me a good name, we'll give you a VMware Fusion license here. That's my trick.
Or workstation for Windows.
But it's called CIP, Customer Experience Improvement Program. In fact, if you've ever seen that checkbox on the vCenter installer, please stop unchecking it, because that's critical to all of these tie-ins in this phone home. But there is a legal framework of what we're allowed to share and not. And that actually gets to my next slide, if I can get.
And that may be the problem with the partner sharing thing at this point, trying to be able to share that customer's data with the partner.
I think it's a really big deal, especially in vSAN environments, because you want to be on par with the other storage side.
Absolutely.
To be able to have your partner support that stuff. This is not stuff that you want customers dealing with on their own.
Well, and it's something we've looked at, and obviously we're not the first one. The storage industry is really what drove, and really it's vSAN because it's a storage product was what drove a lot of this. Because operating system vendors, most people don't do Microsoft Phone Home, and Microsoft. No, I'm not trying to throw rocks at them by any means, but I'm not aware of any real value other than helping them design Windows 8, which clearly the people who were phoning home the data for that were the people who didn't use the start menu and put everything on their desktops. So,
One of the benefits is it helps vendors reallocate their project management dollars, their research dollars, so that they're spending less on features that aren't really being used. I mean, that's supposed to be given as the benefit, that it's a long-term.
But as a customer, I always laughed at that. Because,
No, I know, I know, but I'm saying that's supposed to be the reason someone would do that.
We've got to, if we're going to get people to enroll in this, we have to provide real value for the technical person who is managing the environment.
Yep.
And that's what drove us to, and that's why the storage. So talking to my peers in the storage industry, some of them report as high as 80% of their environments phone home, which isn't unreasonable because they have delivered a lot of value in regards to that. So that's something that's been driving our drive to deliver value. A lot of this framework for phone homes actually been around for a while, since I think 5.5 or something, but it never had a lot of value. A lot of people would opt out of it. A lot of people didn't understand what it was. It was, again, this
There's a lot of FUD about it. Yeah.
Like, what are they doing? They're monitoring my licensing.
Exactly.
They're going to come audit me with it. It's not. It's actually in the legal agreement that this can't be used for hounding you with sales. Actually, there actually is some stuff in there.
So it can't be. There's also so internally back to the CIP conversation. So that data or access to that data, or even us going onto that Humbug screen that you saw, that's limited to employees at VMware that need to know. So I can't go down the hall and ask the HR to go ahead and jump in there for me. She doesn't have access to that.
Not even for a donut?
No, I mean, I would love to trade work for a donut.
This all has to fall under our regulatory compliance frameworks, and the Europeans are definitely driving a lot more there.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you give me your exact support ID, I can go look at your environment. I can't go browse and figure out where you are in there. I'm just going to see a bunch of anonymous data sets.
And on top of that, we have a governance board. So it's made up of legal and other folks in the environment. So everyone from IT to other folks that might need the data. There's probably some executives in that group as well, but they're governing that data to say, yes, we're doing it the right way. Yes, we're protecting it anonymously, and we're storing it this way for this long or so forth. And then they're keeping the guidelines, so we live within those guidelines of that CEIP, that collection of the telemetry data. But again, like John said, it's hard for folks to go ahead and do it. I do workshops a lot, and if I ask 50 people in a room, probably 10 people raise their hand that they have it turned on. And the other folks are like, I'm not allowed to send data out. I can't send logs. I can't do this. So, I understand those concerns, but I think like John said, we need to do a better job of explaining the benefits, as well as being super transparent with customers and partners that we don't have the data that you think we have. We don't have the serial numbers. We don't have the IPs. We don't even know, the name of your host.
Your account reps are not browsing this, figuring out when to sell you more widgets.
Exactly. And it's not used for the upsell or anything like that as well.
On that, you have to prove that, though, because particularly today, when every second hour Facebook does something else, apparently, which they said, oh no, we totally don't do that, and they lie through their teeth.
Right.
So people generally are incredibly suspicious now.
And that's where I think drives, we actually have to show real value with these capabilities, and not that,
But you're right, Justin. You have to be super transparent. Like, we can't just say, don't worry, your data's fine, right? It's going to be okay. And that's what everybody wants to say, or everybody kind of don't talk about it. But just, if we're able to show, hey, here's environment A, the way your eyes view it in your office, and here's environment A, the way that we have it, it's a little more valuable and strengthening that to see that. So
if you can demonstrate it, particularly over
that's why I like showing this UI, even though it's not customer facing, is I want you to see exactly what supports.
Yeah, and that's what companies need to do to be able to prove that they can, and have all of the controls in place, and have the frameworks in place,
and naturally buy-in will happen.
And that's actually one reason why I'm actually kind of excited about GDPR and things like that, is because now that there's real teeth to enforcement, if we're lying about this, we're going to get fined a lot. Like it's
which is why no one trusts any commercial organization, because you've all said, oh, we do stuff because we care about customers, but no one bloody did until GDPR came in, and then all of a sudden we've discovered that actually we really like customers and we should do the right thing by them.
Well,
so it's a bit of it. So for those companies who did do the right thing, it's actually a commercial disadvantage because everyone else just went, nah, whatever.
I'm hoping that these frameworks, enough people get held accountable, and then when you can see that our outside auditors are signing off, we're a publicly traded company, so we have to have outside auditors. We make claims on this kind of stuff. There is that. However, I live in Houston. I live in the shadow of the Enron building. I hear you there.
But I would say, to your point, we came up with a great URL. It's vmware.com/trustvmware/CEIP. So there you go. Trust us, right?
I'm going to throw at him for you.
Your point is super
trust
valid.
But verify.
Right.
Well, so actually, you mentioned the verify. So if you want to see actually what's phoned home in that, if you actually go to storagehub.vmware.com, which is where we keep a lot of the vSAN stuff, I actually have for vSAN Support Insight, which is what we call this phone home technology, I actually have the scripts that you can run to identify where the manifests are before they're going out and go read them yourselves. They're, again, incredibly boring looking JSON files. And I have some demonstration ones where I've already exported them and I've thrown them on my GitHub so someone wants to go tear one of those apart. But if you actually want to go look at it, we have the instructions of where on the VCSA they're staged, where they are. They also all go to the same URL, which makes it a lot easier for...
they're hitting the same VCSA.
They're all going to vcsa.vmware.com on port 443. There's TLS. You're welcome to inspector cert. It's SSL.
And that diffuses a lot of it, because a lot of the people who have those concerns, you show them these 2 or 3 things, and then all of a sudden they won't run the tools. They're not actually that paranoid. They just want to pretend that they're that paranoid.
No.
It's part of building that trust.
And that's what we have to do. We really have to build that trust. And if we don't build that trust, then we're just talking, and no one's going to ever sign up for this. And it's going to, the greatness that's been built in the data apps behind this will just be left alone, right?
And as you point out, it's clearly possible because the storage folks have been able to get away with it.
Right.
Well, look, people want this.
Absolutely.
The vast majority of customers
really
want
valuable.
and need this kind of help. This stuff's getting complex, especially when you start converging all these things, and they don't want to find out the hard way through an outage, right? So
exactly.
And those that don't, okay, they don't. That's going to be the minority, the banks, maybe the government, right?
It's interesting though, because I know everyone talks about banks and the federal and even military to a degree, but when I talk to these customers and we go through all these steps, when we go through this, we have banks, we have federal, we have military that have actually enrolled in this. Now, part of it though is we had to do all those steps. When we just before, here's this document that says we pinky promise not to do anything. They laughed at it appropriately. But once we've started going through and we've walked through, the other thing I've also found is if people talk to you and they're in the middle of an outage, you're like, hey, if you turn this on, your support will be able to do all this, and then suddenly they the compliance. Nothing applies more grease to.
You'll check anything when things are on fire, right?
Yeah.
Well, VMware support isn't cheap, so you might as well get the most out of it by having this, right?
Oh, absolutely.
If you're going to pay for it, you might as well feed them the information that they can get to do their jobs right.
Yeah.
How have you found the uptake of the CIP? Is it mostly vSAN customers that have left that ticked, or are you seeing?
It's been accelerating heavily in regards to that. The exact numbers I don't have. I was going to say, I'd struggle to say that. I will say vSAN, the health alarm tells you, hey, by the way, you're opted out of this if you are opted out. So you actually do get a warning. Previously, people would uncheck the box and there was kind of no awareness or thought about it. vSAN customers, because we've been making this part of our education, we do have a much higher adoption than general vSphere. It's also worth noting that vSAN Health has actually been around since 6.6. And actually, the online health, the actual core vSAN Health is longer. vSphere,
The vSphere Health just got here in 6.7.
6.7. So it's relatively new.
Yeah.
People are just now discovering that value. The other things I want to talk about, you've got kind of these overlapping. So you've got the built-in health checks that just ship outright. You've got the online health checks, which are constantly updating. This has also come in vSphere in 6.7 U1. Then we also have, as an initiative under support engineering, and this is something that's going to be converging more and more with the other two, what you may have heard of called Project Skyline. And that's where you have an appliance that acts as like a grab and pull up. That actually is the CIP Plus agreement. There's potentially some flexibility for customers to opt into initial partner sharing. So I think when we talk about those partner sharing for MSPs or OEMs, cross support and things like that, you're probably going to see that more done there. But that's something you're going to have to go deploy an appliance. There's a lot more. You're going to have to go sign that extra agreement. We're not going to hide anything and start shipping stuff to IBM at any time without anyone aware, I guarantee you. But
and that's purely like a support piece, like a level of support with Skyline compared to the services that we're being able to inject through the telemetry data channel.
And looking at within the UI where you go is if you actually go into monitor on your cluster, you get onto vSAN, you'll see the support tag. This first half of this is what you need to share with your support person or your VMware architect that you want help with. That basically is a unique GUID for that vCenter environment. The obfuscation maps here, I'll actually show you, since I keep talking about it, this is what these incredibly boring documents look like. And again, if North Korea gets access to your subnet mask, I'm still not sure what they're going to do with it. We're not actually sending real data. We're not sending anyone's passwords or anything crazy like that. But this obfuscation map, if you do choose to provide it, then you no longer have to have code talking with support in regards to that. In that case, again, going back to the UI, here's where they update that. That is, again, auto purge. That was something compliance was very adamant about. Again, we've got the common questions. My security team will never allow phone home. And the general question back I say is, are you allowed to upload logs today? And if you're uploading logs today, you're actually giving us more information than already exists in this phone home. To be fully transparent, you're already giving us even more if you ever have a ticket open and upload logs. So this actually, by auto obfuscating those logs, is actually reducing down the amount of information you're sharing. So the true paranoid would actually rather opt into this than just do regular log bundles. And the other question I always push back and say is, are your storage array is phoning home today?